very skilled, accomplished diagnostician. So he's learning new skills as he's working with these guys. So things he may not have known before working with a diagnostic expert is going to help raise his skill level as well. And as you go through some of these inspections, we all know a code doesn't mean you replace a certain part. So there are certain inspections that they're going to go through, and if additional diagnostics or guidance is needed, the remote diagnostic specialist can take care of that. So what about us? You know, it's we've been in our remote technical team, remotely connect, where we talked about, and our services include scanning, diagnostics, calibrations, bidirectional controls in the heavy duty. No programming in the heavy duty side at this time, but it is something that's looking into. And all the areas of concern from the scan results are reviewed, determined by the HD specialist, guided diagnostic steps, and the main benefits are reducing the maintenance and repair cycle time, improving repair and maintenance, customer safety, liability exposure, vehicle towing expenses, and the time to have people come in if you need to call in a mobile guy. Some mobile services are very good, but a lot of people are out of touch or way out in the area, and that could add days to the cycle time of the vehicle.
I think it's important to note this tech, what Chuck does is, and AirPro does, was born out of servicing an industry whose forte is not diagnostics. You know, it's just not what body shops are designed for. But a lot of the interest that they've generated in the heavy duty space leads back to what we talked about earlier. The aftermarket in the heavy duty space is lacking technicians. They're lacking qualified technicians. And this is a stopgap measure to be able to bring in some higher level talent in the shop and still allow them to keep the vehicle in-house.
Yeah, and with the data that's saved from all of these, it also puts the shop will find it, the date and timestamp of every service, the description of the vehicle, all of this is documented, odometer, description of damage if it's damage related, the date of loss or fault if it's timestamped, that goes forward. So things that if it's a collision event or a claim event or could be a warranty event helps put the responsibility of the repair in the right place. The recommendations, the list of modules that communicated on that vehicle, if a calibration is done, the verification of that calibration, verification of vehicle functionality with output tests, and then the customized reports of what you just seen. And if there's anything else in the shop needs at that point, if they need more in-depth diagnostic support one-on-one, our technicians will log in and work together as a team with the guy in the shop. So with that, pretty short. Hopefully we kept it on time. And if we have time for any questions, or if there are any questions. Seems pretty quiet.
Good.
Call the session.
All right, so the reason you saw that was primarily, and we are doing all the program when we're doing.
That's one. Don't touch.
And other financial crimes. And as time has gone along, we had a couple of know in this room are more and more prevalent in our automobiles, and is applicable to the people here. So a little bit more about us. We have a ton of acronyms. We're part of the government. So I heard a couple of the other people getting introduced. Automotive industry has its share of acronyms as well. So we've gone through a couple different name changes. We had fraud or financial task forces and electronics crimes task forces that were different things, and we've merged them all into a cyber fraud task force now. So if there's fraud and a computer involved, we can play in the space. With that being said, we do quite a bit of work through the infotainment systems of vehicles to further the investigations of our crimes. So we have some interaction on that side as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So if you're at home and your computer screen goes like this, have you had a good day or a bad day? This is a bad day. And this is an interactive presentation, so we'll roll with it as we go. So we want to avoid this in all shapes and sizes. This ransomware is not a good thing. With that being said, how many people in the room consider themselves nerds? Okay, I'm great, perfect. We're with my people. Everybody else is on the mechanical side? Okay, so the good thing about this is with most of what I do is delta analysis. And I think as a shade tree mechanic, delta analysis is a big part of diagnostics, right? Is this different than everything else I've seen today? And if so, it's probably something I need to address in one way or another. Same thing's true with a lot of what we're going to do here. So even if you're uncomfortable with IT words, the processes are really the same. So ransomware, anybody got a definition of what it is? Internet's fabulous, right? It's got definitions for everything. So Oxford gives us a definition. And, there it is. I'm not going to read to anybody, but it gives us a new word. Now we got this malware word. So malware is really anything bad that attacks your computer, okay? And a computer's broad, right? It's not just your PC at home or your Apple device at home. It could be your phone. It could be your infotainment system. It could be your refrigerator. It could be your HVAC system at home now, your Nest, your wireless TV system that you've got checking out the delivery guy or whatever else is going on. Wikipedia gives you a longer definition, and we give you a third one. So really, the thing about ransomware is it's malware that's going to attack your system. It is going to cryptographically lock your files so that you can't use them, and then hold you hostage and demand that you pay through a Bitcoin address that we're all super familiar with, right? Everybody in here is a big crypto trader? No? Not a bunch? Okay. So demand that you pay this virtual coin to someone somewhere in the world to unlock your stuff. Maybe. What could go wrong? Okay, so we don't want that to happen. Best way to avoid a problem, the best way to deal with a problem is to avoid the problem, right? Not to let it, preventive maintenance, whatever you want to call it, to keep the problem from occurring. So part of that is having a plan. Do you want to make a plan post-problem or pre-problem, right? Once everybody's freaked out that your entire network is locked up and nobody can open anything and somebody's demanding copious amounts of money from you, is not the time to figure out what you should do. So invest while you're all sane and have time and you're not up against the clock and worried about getting fired to have a plan on what you're going to do. It is not a one-size-fits-all scenario. Everybody's business is different. Everybody's risk tolerance is different. Everybody's exposure is different. You got to be able to apply that to whatever your scenario is and make good decisions for your space. One of the things to consider is, are you going to pay? We get a lot of ransomware attacks that make the news. We get a bunch of healthcare companies have been ransomware recently. We've had some power companies that have been ransomware. Their stakes are fairly high, right? When a sector of the United States is without power, you don't want to be making a plan, right? Like that is a bad day to be making a plan. But you got to decide if you're going to pay or not. Generally, the U.S. government, we don't negotiate with terrorists. We don't think it's a good idea. We're not the decision maker on that, but that's going to be our position, is that you should not pay the ransom. Part of your plan is who you're going to contact. There's generally 3 groups of people that you can contact. Who thinks they can name 1 or 2 or 3 or any of them? I did, and I'll come back. Yeah. So, okay, is that, you're saying you're going to call me? Okay, so I'm law enforcement. I'm one of the 3 people you that could be contacted. Probably should be contacted. Insurance is a second one. Could be a cybersecurity firm. I got one other one that may or may not be in there. Your clients could be one. So that's usually not immediately. So as soon as your screens all start getting the V for Vendetta guy up on there, who else probably needs to be involved? Okay, IT. All right, enough guessing. I think the correct answers are generally law enforcement, insurance, and legal counsel, right? So the command team at the business is probably going to interface. IT's probably bringing it up first. Hopefully somebody noticed it, called the IT guy. He called his boss, and it goes up the chain. And at some point, a C-suite guy's going, what do I have to do? And the people that generally know what we have to do is somewhere in the legal department. And they're generally going to be working with some contracts and maybe a response plan that already exists to know whether you're going to go through the law enforcement or InfoSec response team or your insurer to figure out what the next steps are going to be. So there's a million of these, okay? What do you do to prevent a ransomware attack? The Secret Service has this answer. If you Google it, you get as many answers as you want, because again, it's situationally dependent, and everybody's got their favorite type of shoe. Some of the lists are huge, 35, 40 steps long. Some are 4 or 5. We're somewhere in the middle. You got to do something, right? And this is a good enough place to begin, but certainly during the course of developing your own plan, you'll be in a position to use this model and other models that make the most sense for your business scenario. So the anatomy of an attack. Okay, so access has to be acquired. So if there's two-way communication across the internet, somebody can attack you. Okay, that makes sense? If you're interfacing with somebody's page, web page, Obd2 scanner, car, cell phone, HVAC, all those things we talked about, somebody can send data that it's not expecting and generate an exploit that they can get permissions that you didn't design into having, that they can leverage to generally move laterally across the network and elevate their permissions and do worse and worse things to you. That makes sense? There's a bunch of other peculiarities here, but generally that's what it's going to be. Find a way to attack the network, which is going to have to require two-way communication through any media, and then exploit it, and then move laterally till they find someplace that has the stuff that they want. The stuff that you want is what they want, and then they'll hold it hostage. So how does this apply to you guys? Is your car the weakest link in the home network? I don't know the answer to a lot of these questions, right? Like, I do a lot of presentations. just like you guys, it's the first time I've talked to this group. So this is a little different than there's not a ton of exposure in the auto. So granted, that being said, there's not a lot of concrete evidence that this has happened yet, but it's like a car accident. We're all going to get in one sooner or later, right? It's just a matter of time. So with that being said, is your product, whether it's the infotainment system, the scan tool, the network on the back end of the scan tool, the mom and pop garage shop who are totally into InfoSec, the weakest link in this food chain, and what exposure does it have to you? So, Internet of Things, vehicles. Okay, we talked about lateral movement. It's right there in that position on the anatomy. Can ransomware pivot through your system? Does anybody know? Has anybody tried? Okay. Have you guys had discussions about it at your companies? Awesome. You've begun the planning process, right? Be in front of the dilemma. How about this? Do you manufacture the infotainment system, or are you integrating a third-party product? Do you have any idea what their InfoSec looks like? I see some yeses. I see some like really uncomfortable faces, and everything in between, I think. Okay? Again, and stealing my thunder again. And then do you want it to be? Right? You kind of are in control of this, but are people asking the questions about where this lands in reality? I'm on the outside, so I don't know. This is more kind of food for your thoughts at this point. So does your device have two-way communication? Have you considered the fuel source as a vulnerability? How about the scan tool? Nobody says their tool can be exploited, right? Nobody comes out in the sales brochure says, you know what, this one's really easy to get into. So you can either take their word for it, or you can kind of assess that problem for yourself and determine where you're at in that risk, right? As you reduce risks, which way do costs go? Up, right? Costs go up. Where's the user experience go up or down with heightened security? Down, right? Who likes 24-character passwords? Anyone? That get changed every 30 days. Anybody? Nobody likes that. So we'll talk about some other options for that anyway in the near future. What information is stored on the infotainment system? A lot, right? How much information is on your phone? How much of that information is stored on the infotainment system? A lot. If I pulled out of my garage and hit my spouse because I didn't like her anymore, and then pulled forward and put in reverse and hit her again, pulled forward and put in reverse and hit her again, and pulled forward, opened the door, 30 seconds go by, and I shut the door, and I put it in reverse, hit her again, because I'm thorough, and then pull forward, and then I do it one more time and leave to go to work. Is that information stored in your car? In a lot of cars, right? Depends on the infotainment system and what's in the CAN bus and all that jazz. But have murders been solved by looking at what mechanical events have happened to a car that's stored on the computer inside of it? Absolutely. It's that like I didn't make that up, and it's not a real life event that I was a part of. But Burla, a company that does infotainment system extractions, has used that as a case study where that actually happened, and they were able to pull the data out of a vehicle and say, you know, your alibi sounded really good, so we looked at what happened inside the car. So there is a lot of stuff there. Is it sellable? Stuff on a phone? Absolutely. And again, nobody really knows how much two-way communication is going between your paired device and an infotainment system, and what can come back to your phone that could migrate across a network in that space. All right, there that. And then, forgive me if I'm using really bad pictures. I'm not super familiar with this industry, but free ODB2 or OBD2 software. What's being stored online? Who's securing that? You? Them? Anybody know? All right. So what do you do about it? That 24-character password. We've got this thing called MFA, Multi-Factor Authentication. Who's heard of this? How many people use it? Awesome. Okay. Strong. So we get to go through the definition game again. So if you use two or more pieces of evidence or credentials when logging into an account, the first word was 2FA, two-factor authentication, and then we've gone to MFA for multiple function authentication. Okay. So you want to secure your assets, right? You want to make your stuff harder to be stolen than the other guy. A lot of things in cybersecurity is kind of a bear race. Anybody familiar with the analogy? You're in a race with a bear. You don't have to be the fastest guy in the room. You just can't be last, right? Be harder to compromise than your competitor. Because in general, cyber hackers are people. Are people industrious by nature in everything they do, or are they lazy? I think they're lazy. They want to do as little as they can to get done what they need to get done. And if you're able to kick off a computer process to attack the world, you don't need to spend a lot of time on things you can't get into. You just let the computer find one that it can get into, and you deal with that one. So a lot of automated processes can scale very well against the internet. So again, just be hard enough. Don't have a known exploit that the whole world is picking on at the same time. All right. So MFA, something you know, something you have, or something you are kind of the three definitions that can be used for different types of authentication. Okay. Everybody's probably familiar with SMS authentication. Everybody's gotten the text message saying, okay, put this code in now. Terrible choice. SMS is compromised the world over. If they want to use that to attack you, you're gone. Maybe they don't want to attack you and you get away with it. I've got a couple of things that I cannot get away from that as somebody that cares about InfoSec, I don't have an opportunity to not say use my phone or SMS to harden my logon authentication. Then we get into some other stuff. We get into physical devices. They look a lot like a USB device, and that will be showing that you're present there. The odds of the hacker in Russia having access to my physical hardware token and my other credentials to log in all at the same time is a spy movie, right? Like that's not every day. Authenticator apps are probably my personal favorite. I think it's an easy tool to use. It's more likely that you have your cell phone on you than your key or a USB dongle or YubiKey or something else to that, and use that as a way to further harden your identity is a popular answer in my opinion. Sir?
One of the problems with these is that first choice is what most companies offer you as the only choice.
Agreed.
How is that going to change?
So hopefully, more and more presentations in the last 4 years have talked about the vulnerabilities in short messaging services, SMS, text messages for normal people, and email being routinely compromised from all the data breaches. So credential stuffing, is anybody familiar with that term? Credential stuffing is saying, hey, this guy's Eric Lacombe. Most usernames are first initial, last name, maybe first name, last initial. I'm going to guess, because I'm a computer and I can do thousands of operations per second. I'm going to guess that. And then I have seen that username on the dark web from a compromise of somewhere. I work for the government. Was the government compromised? Yes. Is all of my stuff out there? Yes. Is that awesome? No, that is terrible. It sucks forever. And that's just how it is. But if I use what credential stuffing is going to be is going, hey, we got into personnel files for the government, and this is what user Elecom used for credentials. Did he use it anywhere else on the internet? People are lazy or industrious by nature. Lazy by nature. So the computer says, let's take that and log into everywhere that has a login and password. Do you want to do that? That would suck as a person, right? As a computer, it's just a process. It runs while I'm eating ice cream and watching Netflix. And sooner or later, say, hey, let's go see what's in there. Okay? So credential stuffing is using those same answers again and again and again. Your question, which was really what?
Are we going to move away from SMS and email as the only choice that banks, insurance companies use?
So yes. So again, unfortunately, the government's retirement system will not allow you to use anything but SMS. But everybody else, for the most part, is allowing other options. But us as users and you guys as industry insiders can help shape that space and go, hey, the options that are available in the marketplace without being unnecessarily burdensome to our customers and making that user experience that they don't want to buy our stuff. And go, hey, if I have this tool because, let's just say BFA. BFA allows this. BFA is a big bank. They have lots of customers. So odds are lots of their customers might have these options already installed for authentication methods. You could still use that same tool in your platform and probably mitigate the burden, the new burden to your customer base, right? So apply the scope to, I apply what I use at home, and can I teach my mom and dad to use it without hating myself for a copious amount? Do I have to go to my kids for them to show me how to do it? And I kind of use that as my barometer on how good or bad this solution may or may not be. It's not always the most robust methodology, but I'm a team of one a lot of times, recently a team of two now. But your company may have a group of people that can attack that problem and come up and weigh those different options for you and determine something, the right fit for your company. Sir.
How does the Google method stack up as far as how they have like your phone pages this you sign in? How does that stack up?
So that's multi-factor, right? So they generally default to the phone as the first answer, but generally encourage a second or third. So again, you're helping. You're going, phone's really easy for everybody, bad guys and good guys. So adding one more layer to that, you go, what's the odds that the bad guy has the phone, was able to open the phone and receive the message, so maybe on a splash screen, and goes, okay, I got the code, but I can't launch the app. I can't launch the authenticator. So now you only got one layer of access, and hopefully Google's going to say, I don't think we're going to let you all the way in. So is SMS good as part of the M and not a 2? Probably, but if it's 2 and it's 2 for the MFA and it's just SMS, it's better than nothing, but it's not great. Yes, sir.
How do they explain the SMS? I mean, is it in the middle or is it
Generally, man in the middle type of deal. So there's a group of people that it's fairly targeted. So they've already established somebody that is high wealth. They've probably gone to the dark web and bought all the information that's already out there for them. And they're great at social engineering. They call up T-Mobile and say, hey, I just dropped my phone in the toilet. I bought a new one and I need to get it ported over. Okay, we need you to answer some questions. Well, good news. I got 12 pages of history on this dude. I think I'll be able to answer them. And if they can't answer a question, they're like, we've all had a question that we don't remember the answer to, right? You're like, was it capitalized? Is there a space in there? I don't know. They just skip that question. And as part of the customer service algorithm, you're allowed to skip so many questions. What number is that? I don't know. Varies based on the caller and how good they are and whether they feel like they're getting swindled or if they think it's the real deal. But that's basically the methodology that they go through. The good ones can do it in 5 minutes. We've
It's not like a sting ray.
No, it's not a technological. I've used Spock to connect to your device and port it over, magically like that. No, there's no. If there is, it is super uncommon. And no offense to anybody here, but I don't think there's anybody in the room with enough net wealth to be targeted should such a thing exist of that nature, right? Maybe there's somebody in here that's doing really well, but that type of stuff is a Bill Gates, Elon Musk concern, and not the rest of us. Other questions? Good questions. Okay. So, how much do you do to harden your endpoint? What's the endpoint in your world? Is it the infotainment system? Is it a tool? Is it a network? Is it your subcontractors? What is it? Figure that out for yourself and determine how you're going to work with them and yourselves to solve that problem. And then balancing that act between having the safest world that no one wants to live in or having a world that has managed risks, managed security, and a good enough user experience to make people want to still have your product. And again, there's you don't want to destroy your car, and just don't be last in the bear race. Penetration testing. All right, lots of words in this slide here. How many people are familiar with penetration testing? Couple. How many people use it in their workspace? Less. Okay. So penetration testing is paying somebody to attack your network in the loosest definition of network. That could be attack my infotainment system and see how you can break it and what you can exploit from that, to attacking your corporate office and seeing whose emails you can get into and what pictures are saved on their hard drives and all that jazz. Okay? That sounds terrifying, right? So the options are the bad guys do it or you pay a good guy to do it. And then there's people in the middle. So black hats are bad guys. Bad guys out there trying to exploit your system, to take your stuff, embarrass you, sell it, use it nefariously. White hats are people you pay to follow rules, okay? The business tells them the left and right limits of what they can do. You can't go to my house and hold my wife hostage with a fake gun, have her call me and demand access. Out of bounds. We're not doing that. So you can, as an extreme example, but you can establish what's in play and what's out of play, okay? Gray hats are in the middle. They're people, they're nerds sitting at home that are going to attack your network without you knowing about it, break into it, and then tell you about it and say, hey, I was doing this great thing this weekend, found a vulnerability in your business, and kind of think you should pay me for finding it. But if you don't, it's cool. I don't want to be, I didn't do anything illegal, man. So don't press charges. So they're kind of in that gray space. Some companies actually encourage it. They have bounties and they have this just open forum. When there's a bounty already established to find an exploit, you're probably on the white hat side. When the company isn't offering to pay to find out if there's vulnerabilities, you're probably approaching criminal behavior. Anyway, the point of this is the biggest fear with penetration testing for people that aren't familiar with it is it's not the Wild West. Your company can go through and say, hey, all we want to do, is see if you can go from an outside device, attack my car, gain access, and move once. Can you get one device away? If you can do that, stop. That's it. That's the end of the game. Maybe you want them to go further. That's up to you. But it's not up to them, okay? It's up to the company to contractually scope out how far, how aggressive, how potentially damaging that attack can go. All right. In product development, is security the number one goal? Or is getting a product that works and you can sell the number one goal? A or B? Interactive. B. Okay, B's the answer. So do we ever come back to A? We should. Do we?
After you call legal.
After you call legal, okay, yes. After you call legal, you got to come back to it. Information security is rarely, at least on the network side, without it being applied directly to the automotive industry, IT is generally more important than InfoSec in actuality. Maybe not on paper, but if the boss can't print or read his emails, is that more or less important than there's a vulnerability that nobody's exploited and we don't even know about yet? Right? The problem of today is at hand. All right. So InfoSec is the practice of protecting your stuff. Okay. All right. It's a cost, right? And we went over a lot of this already. But that last bullet, let's talk about that a little bit. Most people don't talk up the security of their systems as a advertisable, saleable reason to buy me instead of you. But if you can manage to come up with a safe system that is not unnecessarily burdensome that everybody hates to log into, you could be a winner, and that could be a real distinguisher between you and your competitor. All right. Brand protection. Who remembers the target data breach? One, two, a couple people. It's huge news. It was in 2013. How many? Stealing my thunder, but it's okay. How many people were affected by it? I was. How about in this room? Anybody affected by it? Yeah. So it happened in 2013. I was actually one of a couple of groups that had bought some credit card numbers on the dark web that helped identify this wonderful little event. Target paid $18.5 million in settlement. How many of you want to write that check? I don't. That's terrible, right? They lost a lot of credit card numbers. It's a big number. Wasn't the biggest breach in the history of the world, even at that time, but it was substantial. Worse than the credit and debit card numbers, they lost a lot of customer data. Okay? And it's getting to be old, right? This is 9 years ago now. We all lost faith. Their stock took a tremendous tumble. It's recovered. And like I said, the attack vector was a third party. It was an HVAC system. They had a vendor portal, right? Target's a huge corporation, right? They've got to have a way to automate letting people interface with the systems that they've bought or used or interface with, right? So they created a vendor portal, but they skipped a little bit on the InfoSec. So an infected third party on an improperly segmented network was allowed to gain pretty much a root level access to the network and then laterally move across, find all that unencrypted credit card and user data, and pipe it out. So a couple things to think about. Back to that delta analysis. This is something everybody loves to talk about, is their network flow. Everybody familiar with their network flow? Know exactly how much data comes in and goes out on your network every day? No? Nobody does. Everybody hates it. But it's part of delta analysis. So you don't need to know that it's 4.5 megabits today and it's something else tomorrow. But somebody should have a historical graph of that. And if it goes up by a factor of 10, something happened, right? Like if you're working on an automobile and normal is here and it goes to here, something happened and we got to figure out what, right? That's normal troubleshooting. So you don't need to be an IT or InfoSec guy to realize that the scale has changed wildly and we should do something. We should talk to somebody that knows more about this than me, but something bad happened and it happened here, okay? ID theft versus credit card data. Who has not had a credit card or debit card compromised? Awesome. I wish I had something to give you. Congratulations. There aren't many that haven't. I've had it happen a couple of different times. Who's had their identity taken? Okay. Which one's harder to deal with? Okay. If your credit card gets compromised, the bank says, that's tragic. It's been canceled. Here's a new one. If your identity is stolen and out there and people start opening up accounts in your name, getting loans in your name, buying houses in your name, it's a reasonably significant emotional event. And there's not a lot you can do about it. It's a bad day forever, basically. So with this, those 70 million customer accounts that were compromised probably had much longer term consequences than the 40 million credit card numbers were. As pretty much as soon as this happened, 40 million people had packages in the mail from various banks saying, yeah, we're done. Here's a new one. We're not even going to let that float for a day. As soon as the news came out, we're dealing with it. Okay. The worst thing about this is kind of what we talked about earlier with they're lazy. I've got processes running. I'm attacking the universe at the internet level. And if I get stopped in 90,000 places, it doesn't matter. I can park that and wait for somebody else to exploit it. I've at least got it identified and say, hey, you know what? If I get an answer to that question, I'll come back and hit those 90,000 people. So there may be an attack ongoing on your network that isn't finished. And do you even know? That's a real hard question to answer. But you have a robust InfoSec team that should be something that they're charged with trying to find. All right. All in all, Target did a pretty good job. They responded very fast as far as the system went. Compared to what other businesses were doing, 4 days they were aware, there was no notifications going out. They owned it, fell on the sword, were all over the media, and began dealing with it. They lost a lot of money right then. They lost a lot of money in the future, but they have recovered, right? Like, is anybody scared to go to Target now? We've gone back, right? Like we were at the beginning, and now they're just another company that's been breached. They handled it well. They had a plan. They fought the plan, and they had a pretty good plan, all things considered. How much can you afford to lose? You know, when you're arguing how much money needs to be spent on InfoSec, consider how much you're willing to write a check for to make up for your Mea Culpa. It's a good way to kind of balance the scales and go to the boss and say, what can we afford? And make a determination as to what's right for you. All right. That's enough of my doomsday scenarios. Sir?
Did Target ever find out? Or the government?
Sure. Yeah. So a company was found. So they were able to work. They have a big IT company, IT infrastructure and InfoSec infrastructure, and we're able to go through logs and determine which set of credentials were exploited and got elevated, and we're able to start moving laterally. It's an HVAC company that had legitimate access to Target's through their portal to remotely monitor and maintain and update the HVAC, right? A legitimate purpose with a contracted customer to do the work. But just going to hazard a guess, the HVAC company probably wasn't as big as Target was, probably didn't have as much of an InfoSec budget as Target did, and Target was probably a lucrative contract for them. I'm not sure where they are on the food chain, but if I were to guess, that would be a reasonable set of assumptions to start with. So the bad guys know this, and they started sitting on the portal, seeing who was logging in, working backwards to see who they were, find somebody with a vulnerability, and then attack them and pivot off of them. So where are you in that food chain? Are you Target? Are you the HVAC system? Are you the guy that designed the vendor portal in the middle? You know, there's a bunch of different people in different portions of the industry in the room. So that answer might vary for each of you, but it's certainly something that should be considered and apply the right level of risk management and InfoSec tools to elevate that. Okay, so the takeaways here: understand what that malware is out there. Some of it's just ransomware is terrible. It's a nasty variant of malware, but just gaining access to your network might be enough to cost your company a lot of money. Target was not a ransomware attack. It was just a data breach. Still cost them more money than I'll see in my lifetime, right? That's a huge amount of money. Harden your endpoints. MFA is an option, and penetration is a way to determine if what you've applied is successful or not, right? Nobody makes a perimeter that they think is exploitable, right? Nobody goes, you know what? I made a really lousy wall today, right? We all think we did a good job. So we need an outside set of eyes to attack it with a different brain than yours and figure out how good a wall it is or not. Have a plan. Creating a plan under the gun is no way to make a plan. It's a terrible way to do business. Do it while you've got time. Is it going to work for the entire problem when it surfaces? Probably not, but hopefully you have a framework that you can mold around whatever scenario actually presents itself to you. All right. With that, we've had a lot of questions throughout, but available for questions if they come up. So I'm here in San Diego. There's somebody like me across the United States and in all the offices in the Secret Service. The FBI has people like me. A lot of state and local police departments have people like me as well. And we all generally work together. If you call me and it's really an FBI problem, I'm going to get you in touch with the FBI guy. Same thing's probably true with the FBI or state and local, right? Whoever, if you're like, you know, I do this, but they really do this. Let's bring it to my friend over here. So have a relationship with someone that again, game day is not your first date. Questions? Sir.
So a lot of the big mix of people in the large elite and small business owners, right? They do larger companies have their own IT group. Like smaller business owners who are buying sales various pieces of equipment around a box, right? They're not building their own system or infrastructure. Are there resources available that says anything that maybe your point of sale is sending data back to this list of known bad countries or this list of known good, some referential information that shows you a place to start, right?
Sure. There are. I'm going to give you the lousy yes answer to that. There are sources out there. Most IT people and InfoSec people should have access to different. There's a lot of companies selling that type of information, saying, "Hey, here are our command and control nodes for a bunch of bad things. If they're touching your network, it's not right, right? You don't want bad things touching your network. Known bad things should not be touching your network. You should not be sending data to known bad things as part of the establishment of your network." So there are quite a few commercial and open source tools that you can use to list out that iterate different known bad locations. And then on the flip side, a very thorough InfoSec or IT person would say, I am able to monitor all of my outbound traffic, and I'm going to, again, establish normal. Like the first time you do it, terrible chore. But after that, you're going to be able to say, hey, we've already checked these. These are all known good things, right? This is Microsoft. I need to get updates. I touch that every day. But these 4 new ones, what are they? And why were they connected to? And whose terminal did it come from? Is an easy early warning tool for your InfoSec team to determine something's happened. I don't know if it's good or bad yet, but it's different than the last 7 days. So I need to figure out what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Did I answer the question?
Yeah. I was also curious if there was like a resource
So how do I answer this question? The government doesn't have a open source answer to that. There are private companies that are selling that type of product. There are government answers to that, but they're not widely dispersed answers, let's say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, everything communicates.
Right.
I'm just curious how the one started about where it connects.
Sure. So that, to me, that's part of the design process is what is this tool designed to communicate with? The Obd2 sensors use an RN42 Bluetooth module in a lot of them. Gas pump skimmers use an RN42 Bluetooth module in most of them. So I have gone into many, many garages, and part of my delta analysis is a gas pump skimmer in the garage or is it on the gas pump? When I can start seeing signal strength driving up as I go towards the garage, it's to say that it's a tool and not a nefarious skimming device. And I can turn around and move on to another location. So knowing what your tools communicate over, and there's a process called whitelisting where you limit who you communicate with based on what you want to talk to. Instead of saying you can talk to anybody and we'll filter out bad traffic later. No. I designed you. You should talk to this and nothing else. That's it. Maybe it's the right answer for you. Maybe it's not. Whitelisting's back and forth in favor, but it is a tool that's out there to know who you're talking to and that you should be talking to them. Maybe a better answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? If anybody's scared, I will hang around in the back for a few minutes afterwards. If somebody's got a doomsday scenario that's going to trip my day up, then we'll talk about that too. But otherwise, there's my contact information. The NCFTA was people that kind of put me in touch with Donnie. So there are a lot of resources out there, and by talking to cops and people like me, you'll find other groups that deal in this space. So if you don't like the guy you get first, you can go on another date and find somebody you do. But know somebody. In all seriousness, know somebody before game day. I do okay on time? Perfect. All right. Thank you, everybody.
We're going to shift gears just a little bit, not a lot. And we're going to kind of look at this from the car side of things. And pleased to have with us today, I'll put his smiling mug up here. No, I won't. I'll go here and put his smiling mug up there. There we go. Brian Doherty from MEMA, Motor Equipment Manufacturers Association. He is their Chief Technical Officer. He's very involved in what's happening with vehicle security, both with the auto ISAC. I'll let him explain that, and of course, his responsibilities at MEMA. He comes from an extensive background of auto design and was with Visteon. So I'm not going to give a long bio because it's a long bio, and just let Brian do his thing. So if you'll welcome up Brian Doherty.
Thanks, Donnie. Good to be here. Thank you for the invitation. The entire NASTF team, you guys are always a pleasure to work with. So, well, I'll start. Eric used his bear joke. So I'm a scuba diver. In scuba diving, people always ask, why do you have a knife strapped on your ankle? And it's for sharks. And they look at you and go, well, you're not going to be able to fight a very big shark with that knife. And really, the knife is to stick in your dive buddy's thigh, so when you swim away, it slows him down. So with that, does this work?
I'm not going dive.
So what I'm here today to talk about is vehicle cybersecurity and data access. All right, so you guys can see that okay. So talk a little bit about vehicle cybersecurity in general, including some of the areas that Eric touched mostly on ransomware and kind of malware that gets into systems. I'll talk a little bit about what happens on vehicles and some of the problems that I think this industry really needs to be aware of there. Talk about data access, which is intrinsically intertwined with cybersecurity because the two kind of go hand in hand. Then talk about some of the impacts on the aftermarket and some of the key points. So in terms of cybersecurity, Eric covered a lot of this, but the real threat, I think, from a real safety standpoint is from nation states. So you're going to have malware, you're going to have ransomware, you're going to have people trying to steal money and credit card numbers and things, and they're just after, basically dollars. But it's asymmetric warfare and economic damage that I think are the biggest dangers that we really haven't seen a lot of yet. We have in some sectors of the economy. We've seen it in electrical infrastructure. You could call some of that could be economic damage as well. But vehicle cybersecurity is going to be a serious issue forever because now we've connected all of these systems that weren't designed to be connected to anything, and we've connected them to the outside world. And the reason you hear a lot about the infotainment stack is because that has been the initial connection to the outside world that kind of can allow bad actors in. So any connection to the vehicle, whether it's wireless or physical, so everything from the Obd2 port to wireless access, whether it's a tire pressure management system or Wi-Fi or something like that, those are all potential access points. So as I mentioned, current vehicle architectures were really not designed to be secure. So in fact, a CAN network was designed to be readily, very robust and readily expandable. So when you plug in a new device on a CAN network, the network doesn't care. It just accepts that new node and lets everyone talk to it. If you've got the right, codes, you can talk to any module on that network. The big problem we've got now is that these networks, being very insecure, now we've added control for steering systems, braking systems, and throttle control. So you've got essentially a weaponized system now that if a hacker gets into that, especially if they know a lot about that system, and nation states know a lot about a lot of things because they can apply a lot of money and time and very smart people to it, we could have real trouble. So those issues, I think, is why everyone's moving to a secure by design. And Eric mentioned some of those aspects, but this is going to be an ongoing battle to keep these systems secure now that they're open to the outside world. Here's a diagram of a lot of the attack surfaces. So you can see just from the number, you may not be able to see this, but I think you'll get the slides after this. But it's everything from tire pressure management systems, so Wi-Fi, but you can also spoof GPS. You can spoof, we talked about man-in-the-middle attacks briefly. There's all kinds of ways that someone can get access to the system. And depending on where they get access and what the weak links are in that network, they can do a lot of things. So one of the key things that we deal with, and you folks in this room deal with a lot in terms of data access, is the Obd2 ports. So I'll talk a bit more about how that's changing. I sit on an SAE committee looking at securing that. But that port was really not designed for what it's being used for today. So that port was a fuel economy emissions regulation essentially rule that port kind of came into being. I used to use a slide. The OBD1 was a disaster, what's now known as OBD1, because once the EPA said, hey, we need all this data to come off the vehicles, every company came up with their own connector. So imagine trying to, log into vehicles. They had dongle kits, or basically cord kits that you would take between your device, depending on which OE you were dealing with. Now that's really standardized on the OBD2 port as we know it today, but it doesn't limit the data in any way. It's a two-way port. You can access much of the data on the vehicle. And in addition to the emissions data that's regulated and required by the government, you have a lot of other pins on that device that essentially OEs have said, hey, I'm going to put my CAN buses and connect them right to those pins. So what we see as an industry is not mandated access to that necessarily, but just convenience, laziness, as Eric would say, on the part of the OEs using those extra pins to get their proprietary data networks to the outside. And if anyone has any questions as we're going on here, please raise your hand and I'll try to answer them as we go. So as I said, I sit on the TEVDS 20 team. We issued J3138 about securing the OBD2 port, or the data link connector as it's known, a number of years ago. OEs recognizing the problem of this, and mainly because of the dongles that can be plugged into these from insurance companies and for other reasons, are looking at removing essentially access to those other pins or not putting the information on those other pins for their own CAN networks. We're also seeing a lot of increases in over-the-air update capability that are now in vehicles. So just about every OE that I've talked to is moving to an over-the-air update scheme in one way or another to be able to update their software. And it saves them a lot of money rather than a vehicle coming back into the dealership to do a download. They can just push it out and do hundreds of thousands of vehicles at the time. This is going to reach about 100% of all vehicles pretty soon. Very much less expensive than other methods, but now you're opening another attack surface. If the over-the-air update system gets compromised, now you're not just dealing with a bad compromised laptop in a service bay, you're dealing with someone intentionally taking over and sending malware out to hundreds of thousands, if not even millions of vehicles, depending on the OE. So that all requires a very cyber secure download system. One of the ones I worked with the Uptane team in the very beginning, who worked with a lot of the government agencies developing a secure way to do that. And a lot of the OEs are kind of working on that. As I mentioned, data access and cybersecurity go hand in hand. There's a lot of standards out there. NHTSA through FMVSS says, hey, we can do anything we need to recall an unsafe vehicle. So imagine you have a module that's on a vehicle. It's been out there for 8 years. No one thought it was a problem, but now it's deemed a cybersecurity risk because there's been a hack on that vehicle. How much will it cost that OE and the supplier that potentially supplied that module to fix that? There may even be cases where that module really can't be fixed. It needs to be either replaced or even the architecture needs to be redesigned. So you have situations where it may be cheaper for the OEM to actually buy back and crush the car than it is to fix it. So we talked a little earlier when Eric was talking about NIST. NIST has a lot of cybersecurity guidelines and best practices. I've worked over the years with the FBI, the NSA, Homeland Security, as it's now known. I also am MEMA representative to the Auto ISAC, which does a lot for the industry, but is by no means a solution to this problem. And the other point I wanted to make about NHTSA is they reserve the right to recall any vehicle that they deem as unsafe, no matter how old it is. So you can have a module that's on a vehicle from, as I said, 10 years ago, and if they think that's unsafe, they will order you to recall those vehicles, which would be, as Eric said, a very bad day for your company. So now let's talk briefly about aftermarket data access and then kind of how these fit together. So obviously we use the OBD2 port. I'm not saying any of this that's new to any of you folks in the room, but it's the access to the OEM data buses on through that OBD2 port that's most interesting to this whole industry, I think. In terms of needing that data for design of aftermarket parts, as far as what CAN data is coming in and out of ECUs that are aftermarket. Then there's telematics data. So data generated and transmitted either on the vehicle to off-vehicle servers for fleet management, for insurance, for other things, and then as well as proprietary diagnostic links. I mentioned previously over-the-air updates, so OTA is over-the-air. FOTA is firmware over the air, which is very similar, and SOTA is software over the air. So all those acronyms basically mean a very similar thing. We have a very active vehicle data access working group within our AASA division that I participate with. But why is this access important? So 70% of vehicle repairs are done in the aftermarket. Consumer choice. Consumers want data access because, especially the second or third owner of a vehicle when it's 8 or 10 years old, they don't want to pay OEM dealer repair rates for their repairs. So they may want to use their own shop. But the cybersecurity threat is kind of a double-edged sword in that the OEs are typically saying, hey, we want to protect our systems, which is all good. But if that locks out the aftermarket, that's bad for the aftermarket and the consumer choice. So there's kind of a dance going on right now on how all this is going to work out. One of the neat things about my position is I work with the OEs and the OE part suppliers as well as the aftermarket and the heavy duty suppliers. So I get to kind of see how this is developing across the entire industry. It's quite fascinating, but we're going to have some definite growing pains here. So secure systems have to be in place both for the OEs and for the aftermarket data access, and they must not prevent consumers from being able to repair the vehicles the way they want to. So we need a system that will do this. There's collaborations between the aftermarket and OEMs, but I would say it's probably not well. You're probably all aware of the Massachusetts lawsuit that's going on right now. The collision industry is really kind of the canary in the coal mine, and that was mentioned in the first presentation. The collision industry sees brand new vehicles, and we've all read the stories where the Lamborghini gets purchased in the dealership and somebody wraps it around a tree, 10 minutes later because they have no way of controlling that vehicle. That happens. So they get to see the data access into brand new vehicles, essentially. This is probably mostly old hat for you, so I'll kind of skip through this, but there's an Obd2 connector or a DLC. We're going to see the real key here is it's two-way communication. And so we hear a lot in the industry, oh, the aftermarket doesn't need two-way communications. We're just going to make it one way where data flows out. Well, how do you talk to the modules to tell them which data you need? How do you put that steering module in the right test mode or that engine ECU in the right test mode to spit out the right data? It has to be two-way communication. There's no way today to repair a car without true two-way communication. If you don't have two-way communication, then you're completely beholden to that OEM spitting out what they think you need to repair the car. So then there's also, of course, changing module parameters, changing PIDs, looking up DTCs, but then also accessing those proprietary CAN networks that I mentioned, that over the years, people have figured out how to interface with all of those proprietary OE codes, essentially, and use that data in the repair process. One of the problems we've got is, aftermarket OBD2 dongles that are out there from the insurance industry for, fleet management, for insurance, for tracking, for rental companies and things. CERT, which is one of the, it's a four-letter government, quasi-government agency that works closely with the FBI and other things, did a study of, I think it was 8 or 10 dongles a number of years ago, and they were all found to be horribly insecure from a cybersecurity standpoint. So people that are plugging these dongles in, you're essentially plugging in a wireless modem into your vehicle bus, and then if a hacker comes along and can access that wirelessly, they can access and have two-way communication with anything on your vehicle. So, as I mentioned, people have gotten used to the level of access that's in the OBD2 bus today. But that command access, being able to talk to a module and tell it that you want to put it in a test mode and get that data off the vehicle, OEMs are starting to work towards shutting some of that down. The Obd2 connector, and this is one of the confusing things about this discussion, that won't go away because it's required for emissions data, at least on internal combustion engine vehicles. And all the OEMs we've talked to, even for battery electric vehicles that really don't have that emissions issue, are still planning to keep that Obd2 connector, which actually is surprising to me. I would think it would be a cost saving, they'd get rid of it. But you're going to see the amount of data on those other pins essentially going away and becoming more proprietary or another wireless type link for the OE. Now, some OEs will continue using that, but they may have locked it down with a gateway module or something of those sorts, so that unless you have the proper access, you can't get in. This is going to lead to, more proprietary access where you have to pay a fee. And if you're a shop that deals with all makes and all, you may have to every month pay 40 sets of fees to different OEs if you want to maintain that access. And that gets hard to do from a business standpoint. But it's very important that the scan tool manufacturers, are dealing with this issue. I know a number of you are in the room here, in dealing with those multiple OEM kind of firewalls and data access issues. So part of my role is I work with folks like in the room today, but also the OEs, as I mentioned, on some of these cybersecurity and other issues. And, as I said, it's an interesting perch looking at things from both the OE point of view and the aftermarket point of view and trying to get cooperation and understanding there. So we have the AASA Mobility Technology Council. We have an ADAS working group because it's involved in a lot of those steering and throttle and other control things, is a very big part of cybersecurity. I sit on a number of SAE committees, and we work with AutoCare. I saw Aaron was sitting next to me a second ago, but work closely with Aaron and his team at AutoCare, with the folks at SEMA, with the folks at ETI, with Donnie and the folks at NASTF. So these efforts have led to legislation to try to help the industry sort out what it's struggling to sort out with in terms of like the Repair Act here that was introduced this year. There's other right to repair bills that are ongoing in Congress, and some of them have focuses on consumer products like iPhones. Some of them are focused on tractors because farmers are up in arms right now about lack of ability to access repair data and the information they need to repair their own tractors. And then I mentioned the Massachusetts lawsuit that's ongoing. So there's the decision there has been delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. And it just got delayed again. If you want to know more about that, ask Aaron from AutoCare, he'll tell you. But the industry is trying to work together. Just briefly mention data privacy. So specific vehicle data, so vehicle location data, very important. External data in terms of speed, driving behavior, and sensor data from the cameras, LiDAR, what the vehicle is seeing from its sensors. Then in-cabin data can be things like video, audio, user recognition, even your music choices. Someone would be willing to pay to learn what your music choices were. What's that? Except for Greg. Greg, nobody wants to know about Greg's music choices. But Eric mentioned this briefly too. Whenever I get out of my rental car, and I've forgotten a few times, but my public service is I delete everybody's iPhone data from the rental cars. Just a little thing I do. My wife says, "Why are you doing all this?" I said, "Well, these people are idiots and they left it on here." Now, that data is in the system if somebody actually allowed the infotainment system to download the contacts. Theoretically, you shouldn't be able to get to it unless you join it with that same iPhone or mobile device again. But a hacker who has access to that system can actually get to that data, and that's been proven a number of times. So that can be garage door codes, it can be contact lists, it can be your medical information, anything that phone downloaded to that vehicle. Then, of course, we have non-vehicle specific data privacy, so things like credit card numbers, phone calls, texts, things like that you don't want out there, but also account information and passwords. So what does this mean for the aftermarket? We've got to make sure that we have a cyber secure way to access vehicle data and work with the OEMs to make sure that this can happen so that consumers can have choice in their repair process. But we're going to see OEMs limiting command access until we get this kind of cyber secure system in place. As I mentioned, the OBD2 connector is going to remain, but the access that we think and are used to getting from that connection will start to change in many cases. Scan tools, I mentioned the proprietary OEM links where you have to pay some fees. That's already ongoing and being worked on now. But these systems are getting increasingly complex. The risks are getting higher because we have the steering, braking, and throttle control now connected to vehicle systems. And then there's also, the last one on here, the potential to lock out the aftermarket with encrypted communication or module IDs. So if anybody puts a non-Tesla module in on a Tesla network, the vehicle just won't start. So in summary, oh, you got a question?
Sorry, last slide. Can you elaborate on that second bullet point? You mentioned as OEMs, are you specifically verify what OEMs? Sounds like
All OEMs are looking at this. All OEMs recognize the problem. There's going to be some different approaches that I think they're taking.
all OEMs are looking at cybersecurity, or all
Oh,
OEMs are looking to lock down.
Those go hand in hand. So,
I would argue the second is not true.
okay.
They're not looking to lock out the
Yep.
Just-
So you are one of the stars, I would say, in the OEM. No, and so,
I'm not looking for an applause, I just want to
No,
make sure that
no,
we're
but-
not
so-
overstating a problem that maybe doesn't exist for the majority. And I welcome any
Okay.
OEM to speak up if they care, but that's a very general comment, and quite honestly, it's not 100%.
okay. No, but I would say Toyota is one. So I'd just say Toyota is probably one of the leading companies that I know of that is looking at aftermarket data access in a different way than some of the other large OEMs are. Because most OEMs look at it as we want to control our stuff. What I've talked to when I've talked to Toyota folks is a little different, saying we understand that if the 10-year-old, the third generation or third owner of a 10-year-old Corolla, using Toyota as an example, can't get their car repaired in a cost-effective manner, the resale value and therefore the residual value through the entire chain of that vehicle may go down. Some other OEMs don't look at that the same way. So yes, it's a general comment and maybe a dangerous one, but I'm just pointing out the direction that a lot of companies in the industry are going is going to, in the eyes of folks in this room, other than the OEMs, start to restrict data access. But good comment, and thanks for being a good company in this collaboration. All right, so traditional OBD2 access is going away, even though the port isn't. OEMs moving to more secure proprietary and wireless links. Although surprisingly, a lot of OEMs have stated they're going to continue using the OBD2 port, even on battery electric vehicles, which I found amazing, but it's good. Basically, everyone is working on over-the-air update capability. Cybersecurity and user access authorization and control are going to be one of the top requirements, obviously, for any new data access system. So as the aftermarket works with OEs on a solution to some of these problems in a standardized way, it's going to have to be cybersecure. So any questions? We covered a lot of ground quickly there. But I would argue that ransomware is the least of our worries as an industry. Imagine you hack into a vehicle through some type of nefarious connection, however you get into the vehicle, or are able to download malware. You know, you can theoretically accelerate a vehicle, you can theoretically steer a vehicle, and if you have enough data, you can steer a vehicle into something. So there's a lot of big downsides that essentially would be an act of war, but you know, we've seen a lot of strange things in the world in the last 5 months. So. In fact, the timeline is a lot slower than I initially would have said 5 years ago. Because the fact that as all these new battery electric vehicle models come out, and OEs are still putting the OBD2 port in there, using that. The problem is you get into these discussions on OBD2, the port's going to be there. But what data is still going to be there? Is it going to be the same data you used to be able to get off that port, 5 years ago? Or is it going to be a reduced set of data that's more generic, definitely the emissions data, but you may not have access to the other CAN networks that work on those auxiliary pins?
At the end of the day, does it really come down to proprietary access versus standardized access?
I think you're going to.
User authentication.
Yeah, so it's going to have to be a cyber secure. And I should have put the slide in here with what's now called OBD1, which is a plethora of connectors that came out in California, CARB, and then the EPA essentially mandated that emissions data come off cars. That rapidly went from 40, 50, 60 connectors. Every OE had a different one. Some OEs had 3 or I think GM had 3 or 4 OBD1 connectors, as they're called now. If we can develop as an industry a more standardized way, it's going to in the end be better for everybody, because then everybody is looking at this cyber secure interface and trying to poke holes in it, doing pen testing, as Eric mentioned, and other things with a lot of eyes, rather than a bunch of proprietary networks that may or may not be as secure.
I may not have phrased the question correctly. It's
Yeah.
not so much poking individual networks, it's getting in and out of the vehicle with a common user authentication. That if I buy a scan tool and something here, and I sign up with the authentication authority, like what we have to launch this, that I have, they know who I am, they know where I work, they know I'm legitimate, that I don't have to get a different authentication for every brand that I work with. I think that's at the end of the day, that's what they're trying to accomplish in that speech.
Yeah, exactly. But every OEM may not go down that path unless there's regulations in place. Well, but there's a lawsuit, as you know, and it's, we've been waiting for 8 months for a first initial ruling on it. So, you have a question?
Is anybody look, do you know if anybody's looking at using watching as part of the security? Because in my mind, it would be a good option to use watching security.
So theoretically, yes, I can understand.
Yes, scrutiny and that type of thing. I mean, I don't know enough about it, but I was doing research, I thought it was something looking at.
I'm sure that's being considered. Blockchain is being considered for all kinds of kind of traceable authentication for lots of things. You have a question?
Are there any, has there been any reports of any non-localized vehicle hacks, like to the cellular connection that's been targeted rather than general attack?
So the correct answer is no. There are some suspicious things that have happened. And in a few cases that Eric could probably better address. But I think everyone's worried about that, because the problem is if you do a really good job as a hacker, as kludgy as some of, especially older vehicles are, you can get in and out and do something, and there could be potentially no trace. What was that?
Yeah,
So there haven't been any major, multi-vehicle kinds of hacks wirelessly. But, the danger is also not just an immediate hack, as Eric, I think, mentioned in one of his slides. It could be something that lies dormant for years. And you have some malware that's just sitting on the system waiting for a command from somewhere above to activate. It's sinister, but that's the reality of the world. So. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone. I'll be happy to answer any questions later. Anybody has.
All right, I'm going to make a little change of our order here, just so that speakers who went to all the trouble to come here can make their presentations. And if we do run out of time, I'm going to be at ABI next week recording all of the material that we didn't get done. So you'll be able to see it in a couple of weeks. So, but right now, I guess it was, it's been months and months ago. But Jeff Peavy that works at ICAR reached out to NASTF and said, how come we don't work together? Because no one ever asked. And he said, well, I'm asking. So I got an opportunity to go to ICAR in Wisconsin, hang out with those guys. That's a fun group if you ever get a chance, particularly this guy. So we've been working on ways that we can help each other to forward both of our initiatives. So I asked Scott to come and join us today. Some of you may be completely aware of ICAR. Others may have absolutely no idea at all. And so Scott is really the guy when it comes to all of their repairability and really a lot of the training materials that they put out. And I'm going to let him talk about what he does. And welcome Scott Van Hooley from ICAR. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess I should put your slides up, huh? Sorry about
That
that.
might be helpful.
Oh,
So I'm the canary in the coal mine for the collision industry. So ICAR's been around since 1979. We really got our start when the unibody vehicle came out because nobody knew how to fix unibody vehicles. We'd lost a full frame, all those kinds of things. So that's where ICAR started all those years ago. So I always put up our vision and mission statement because we're here to make sure that everybody in the industry, so that's the mechanical shop, the collision repair technician, right down to the insurance adjuster or even the tow truck driver, we want to make sure that there's enough information and knowledge out there for them to actually repair these vehicles and work on things safely. And so it's knowledge, skills, and information are kind of our main things that we're looking at right now. So just a real brief overview here. Back in 2010, you can see we had a couple things. We had some contract training we did. We had our welding certification, and then we had our regular training courses. But then when all of a sudden the vehicles started to get more and more advanced, we're starting to see a lot more ultra high strength steels and aluminum and carbon fiber being integrated all over the vehicle to the point now where we have Frankenstein's monster for a structure. We expanded what we offer. So we're doing things with my group, which is the Repairability Technical Support. I love the acronym RTS because it just rolls off the tongue when you say it. And it's one of those things that we were put together to make sure that the industry had the information they need to fix these vehicles. Because the collision industry came to us and said, we need ICAR to do this. And so we responded to the industry by creating a website, giving them an avenue to ask questions directly to an OEM with technical questions, because a lot of the OEMs, unless you know a guy who knows a guy, you were not able to get any collision answers out of that industry. And now with all the ADAS and electric vehicles, we're starting to see more of those questions trickle in as well. And the level of complexity has taken another turn for the more complex with all those technologies coming in. So I'll just touch real quickly on the RTS website. The link is on the page here, but really we're there to help the industry find that information. So we have several different searches. We have an ADAS calibration requirement search. We have a hybrid and electric vehicle disabled search on there. And each one of those you go through and we'll show you how to get to the information on that particular OEM. ADAS is one of my favorite ones where there are 7 or 8 different kinds of sensors and cameras, but there's almost 500 different names at the OEMs for all of those different cameras and sensors. And so we were having shops that were calling us up and saying, hey, we can't find this information. Well, you're calling it the wrong thing. It's actually called this. And sometimes it was some of the names, I don't know how that became the name for that sensor or camera. And so there's a lot of confusion around that. And we started developing that search for that purpose. We also do a lot of articles, and these are technical articles. They're made for technicians, when we're doing research on something, we found out a piece of information that they need to know that you might not readily see in that repair procedure. It might be one little note in there that if you miss that step, you're in trouble. So we have a lot of different tools on the website that we really go through to kind of cover some of that information and help that technician find it. We also have things like position statements, OEM information pages, where we have a series of articles just explaining what everything is and where to find it. We've had shops that call us up and said, I've been looking for this piece of information for 3 hours. Well, on this particular sensor, it's plug and play. There's no calibrations. There's not even a operation check that you need to do. So they spent 3 hours of their day looking for something that doesn't exist. So we even include things like that on the website. If they, are spending 3 hours wasting their time for something that doesn't exist, we can usually point to them in about 5 minutes and we can get them right where they need to be. If anybody in the room after this, I got business cards up here. If you have people at your company you'd like a deeper dive on the website, I'd be happy to set up a webinar with you guys, customize it for what you do, and walk through each of those different sections of the website that pertain to your particular business. So that's always out there and open. One of the other things that we have with iCar, we have our sustaining partners. So these are just companies that we work directly with. They help support iCar, so it takes some of that burden off of the collision repair facilities. We also have a training alliance program that's part of that. So once you're a sustaining partner, you can join the training alliance. And with that, any training that you have, if it's relevant to any iCar training, it can take the place of that. So we're making sure that technicians aren't getting redundant training out there. That's one of the reasons we have that sustaining partner program with the Training Alliance. So we have Appleton, Wisconsin Tech Center. So it's about 30 minutes south of Green Bay and about 2.5 hours away from Chicago, to kind of give you a little bit of perspective on that. And this is kind of where all of our technical resources were, all of our instructional designers, every video and photo pretty much that was shot in this building. And we're still utilizing this building. We're going to be remodeling the front office area, and I think next year we're going to hopefully remodel the shop area again and get some more expanded room in the Appleton facility. But that has been always the technical mothership of iCar. But now recently we have leased what we're calling our Chicago Tech Center down in Vernon Hills. And so this is just shy of 50,000 square feet, with 35,000 square feet of that being shop space. And we'll get into the reasons for this a little bit. But kind of give you a general idea of the location. It's very centrally located. It's close to O'Hare Airport, and we're going to be having a lot of activity going on there. So one of the things we're going to be doing out of this facility is we're going to have approximately 4,000 students a year going through it, and that's going to be for hands-on training. So this is going to be something that a lot of our training has moved to online, but these are going to be classes that we're going to be able to really dive deep on some of these new emerging technologies with ADAS and also EV vehicles, and I'll cover some of those courses a little bit more in detail. So this building is going to be open to the industry as well. So if you have a training class or something you want to do, or a meeting you need to have in the Chicago area, this building will be available for the industry to use. We just need to get it scheduled in there. But we're going to have a lot of technology in this building. It's going to be state of the art. We're also looking at doing a lot of augmented reality, virtual reality training courses as well. So this building is going to showcase a lot of that kind of technology as well. And we're going to be opening it up here May. We're going to be moving the equipment in that we've been procuring over the last few months. And by June, we should be up and running with some of the first training courses out of that building. So we're doing this, we built this building. It was basically a big open warehouse. And we're diving down into this, and we're looking at the color of the floor because of, and the shine of the floor because of 360 camera or some of these camera calibrations, not liking reflective surfaces. These labs are very wide open and large because of that reason. We're going to have a lot of the interconnected screens and things like that, so we can go from a classroom setting, recover some of the content, walk out into the lab, and the same information can be shared there at the lab. So it's going to be very interactive with that to really immerse the students in that training. This kind of shows the layout of it. So we have a secure vehicle storage area, the ADAS lab, which we have a large flat surface, perfectly flat surface, which the contractors were asking us, nobody ever asked for this. Why do you guys need this? And we went through quite a process to have something that was self-leveling, and they've had to do several different coats on it to get it to where we have a perfectly level floor. Because out of this lab, we want to do training in the lab, but we also want to do some research. Okay, we do a calibration on this vehicle, and it's perfectly flat, everything exactly how it's supposed to be, and then take it out onto the shop where there's a floor drain and there's maybe a little bit of a slope, calibrate it, and try to see what some of those differences are. So we're going to be doing a lot of training out of here, but there's also a lot of research because we still see a lot of collision facilities, mobile technicians, and even some of the mechanical facilities and dealerships that they're doing calibrations out in the parking lot, and the parking lot sloped and all kinds of problems there. So we want to start doing a little bit of analysis on some of that work as well to say, okay, here's what it really looks like. So then the EV lab, that is going to be purpose-built for electric vehicle training. The hybrid and electric vehicles, we've had hybrids for quite a while, but now the electric vehicles, there's another problem because now this large battery pack on the bottom is really close to that rocker panel. And if it gets hit in the side, if something comes up from underneath, that battery is at a lot higher risk. So there's some additional things a collision repair facility has to be aware of with those kinds of damages on those vehicles that the typical mechanical shop is not going to have to deal with or see. So we're looking at a lot of those different things and have so quite a bit of training that we'll be doing on that. And then we have the Flex Lab. That's basically we can do anything we want in there. But then we also have a welding lab and a repair procedure validation area, which that's going to be probably more focused on the collision side of things, but we also have that ADAS lab for a lot of that testing. So this is just a quick overview of some of the different areas in there. Like I said, this was a big open warehouse with horrible lighting. So we put all new LED lighting in there and really changed it up quite a bit. These pictures really don't do justice to the scale of these rooms. When you're in there and you have 4 vehicles in there and there is a football field in between them, it feels like. There's a lot of space, so we can do a lot of different things in this facility. Front office area. And then we also have, we've been doing what we call a repairer's realm. And we talk about different issues out in the industry. It's typically kind of back and forth conversations. We've got some really cool camera equipment that can zoom in and pre-load things so we can really have that high quality interactive conversations and things like that and get a lot of content very quickly. We're also going to be using a lot of that camera equipment to capture some of the ADAS lab information as we're doing some of that testing, training courses, articles, all those kinds of things. We'll have a lot of different avenues to capture that technology stuff. Currently, we have the ADAS resource page on icar.com, and we already have quite a few courses. So these courses, we've had them now for a number of years. General in kind of their purpose, going over everything on how to do these calibrations on all these different makes and models. We also just came out, I think last week, with an ADAS calibration technician role. So all these training courses, along with some other ones, are incorporated in there. And then we have some a hands-on training that we're rolling out in the new CTC. That's going to be, there's a general calibration course that's coming out, and there's also a Ford-specific hands-on calibration course that will be taught out of the Chicago Tech Center, and that will be a 2-day course. So technicians will be at actual vehicles doing calibrations, showing them some of those different nuances and things like that. We've been doing a lot of work around EV. When Dirk Fuchs joined us from ZF, he helped us draft our best practice. And what that is in the collision industry, when an EV comes in after it's been in an accident, we have to assume that some of the safety systems of that EV are compromised. We have to make sure that there's not a puncture in the battery, that there's not cells that are out of level and are starting to heat up, because then all of a sudden we could have a thermal event and burn down the body shop. So there's a lot of different things that we have to look at. And so we came up with this best practice, and we brought together OEMs, collision repair shops, insurance companies, tool equipment makers, and we discussed this. So it's an industry car. It's really the industry said, yes, this is the best practice, particular thing. And in this case, it was based off of a European regulation for EVs and how you approach it, because a lot of the OEM information, while all the pieces are there, it may not always flow the same way. Each one has a different flavor of how do you get to that point. And because we have to approach the vehicle a little bit differently, this best practice is used in conjunction with the OEM information. So you can't use this just in place of OEM information. You have to have both. But it has a standardized way to approach that vehicle step by step and go through it, so that the vehicle is not getting, the technician is not getting injured, or in most cases with EVs, if you make a mistake, killed. We're really trying to make sure that we don't have that accident that now all of a sudden the legislature starts taking a look at it because there's so many deaths. So we want to make sure that technicians are safe, and that was a big part of the work we've been doing. We also have a lot of articles on the website. So on that hybrid and electric vehicle disabled search, you can go in and we have what we call a hotspot article. And basically it's a giant spider web that goes to all these different articles, what the OEMs call different pieces of technology, where to find information, anything with safety is also in there. So just kind of getting everybody level set, because we found with the high voltage information, even some of the mechanical shops, they might be great at diagnostics. They might be able to understand electrical theory, but high voltage is another animal that they don't really fully understand. We actually ran a course at WorldTech that I'll cover a little bit more detail here. And there were 24 technicians in there that work on European vehicles and things like that, and are diagnostic technicians for the most part. And they said, yeah, I really know nothing about high voltage systems. So it's something that the collision industry is heavily involved in, but we're starting to see with all the ADAS and EV vehicles, the two houses are starting to kind of come back together, with mechanical and body starting to work a lot more closely. So for the electric vehicle courses, we already have 7 of them out there. These are kind of very fundamental, foundational courses, how to inspect these vehicles. There's also some basic electrical, because when I was in the body shop, guess what my diagnostic tool for all electrical problems were? I had a test light. Beyond that, I said, hey, Todd, I got this car, something weird's going on, I don't know what it is. And I'd send it over to Todd on the mechanical side, and he diagnosed, and I painted over a ground or forgot to hook something up, but he could diagnose it where I was done. So our challenge right now is to take collision guys and get them beyond a test light that would be a horrible, horrible tool for a high voltage vehicle, and get them to a level where they can actually disable this vehicle, know that it's safe. And the way we're doing that, so the phase 1 you can see here is for safety, building that foundational knowledge. And then eventually we want to get to the point where the ICAR course for the collision networks and things like that, would be the foundational one that everyone goes to. And then you'd have additional OEM certifications that you'd have to maybe go to a 1 or 2 day course, or maybe even some online training for their specific vehicle. But have the hands-on getting dirty course be our 5-day live training event. This course, I went through the pilot course on it, and I've seen it taught now a couple times, and I learned more in this course than I did in my entire life before that day. We go through with these Lucas Noel boards, and we're building circuits, simple circuits so people can understand the very basic, simple part of it, all the way to building actually a power inverter on it so they can see kind of the basic functionality of it. And so that's really important for the collision technicians, because they are starting basically from ground zero for the most part in the understanding of electrical systems. And even some of the mechanical technicians, they love the boards. They were talking about buying it for their shop to train the new guy. So it's just very, very practical, and but it translates over to our demonstrator, our what's the name of the cart? Simulator cart. And so this simulator cart is, we kind of go through how that high voltage system works and really understand what you need to know about these high voltage vehicles and the components. And the simulator cart it's really fun little cart that we built. It has an inverter on it. It has a high voltage battery that's, of course, a 12-volt battery, so there's no harm of, no chance of getting hurt. But it's got the bonding cables. It's got all those kinds of pieces on it, and we can actually install faults into this cart so that when we're going through the course, we can say, okay, this one has, there's no bonding, there's no this, and the technicians can get kind of that real world experience on the simulator cart that also applies over to that vehicle. And then on the fourth day, we start introducing an actual high voltage vehicle where they're going to start taking apart the connectors and disabling that vehicle and go through that exact same process they did on the simulator cart, and now go over to a real vehicle and actually, go through and use that 2-pole voltmeter to make sure that there's no voltage, because in the collision space, if we go in there with our 2-pole voltmeter and there's voltages in places that there shouldn't be, our standard on that is step away. It's got to go over to a high voltage expert, because now you're working under live conditions, and that's the space that we don't think any of the collision shops will ever go to. There are people out there that are cracking batteries open and repurposing them and things like that. That's not the collision space. That's not any of this training goes to that level. It's literally, we disable the vehicle, we replace these components, we put everything back in there, we check for isolation and bonding, and the vehicle is safe to operate. And if there's something that's outside of that, we're done. It's got to go somewhere else. Because right now, Audi's a good example. If a collision shop has an Audi vehicle, high voltage vehicle in the e-tron, they have to bring it over to the dealership, get it disabled, bring it back, and then every day that technician has to go and get a repair order signed by the high voltage expert to make sure that that vehicle is still disabled and they haven't changed anything, and it's only good till 5 p.m. that day. So every single day they have to go back and forth. Or worse yet, they'd have to put it on a flatbed, bring it over there, have them do the work, bring it back. Oh, there's a problem because we figured out this part now is not working. And so all that is rental cost and things like that. So we're trying to get this training to a level where they can disable the vehicle safely, understand what's going on with it, and not have that back and forth and just absolutely kill their cycle time. Where, a company like a State Farm, they're paying out millions and millions of dollars a day in rental cars. And so every day that that vehicle sits in the repair facility, it drives up the repair costs for the insured, and it just takes up space in the shop. So there's a lot of stuff with the EV that's a real big disruptor in our industry, and I think the service side of things we'll start to see this in the not too distant future as all of these OEMs are bringing out more and more EVs. So this is one of the big ones for us right now. So I know I covered a lot of stuff. I went really fast, but anybody have any questions? All right.
I have one just to make a simple question answer. You mentioned isolation and bonding. I mean, I don't like the background. I wasn't familiar with the bonding.
So that's the cables in between the different components of the high voltage system, because they have to isolate that. They can't use the chassis to isolate it. They have to isolate it through the wires, because that's with the grounding to the chassis with high voltage. That's very bad. Because
So
yeah.
it's just a dedicated ground line.
Yes, yeah, it's isolated from everything else, and if there's one component that has an isolation fault, you're still okay. But then there's a second one, you touch it, now you've just completed that circuit. And I know, so we're going through this level of training, but over in Germany, who probably has the highest level in the world of training requirements and what you have to do on a high voltage vehicle, they just had a technician that he was a high voltage expert. He tripped and fell on an open battery case, and he's dead. And so we really want to make sure that doesn't happen in the U.S. That one was a freak accident, but the OEMs have done a phenomenal job of building in these safety systems in these vehicles. But we have the problem of a collision just happened, and is that bonding cable now cut? Okay, we put the vehicle back together. We forgot to put one on there. We painted over something we shouldn't have, and paint is a great insulator. And so in this case, that's a lot of problems. So when my little problems with the 12 volt system, and I'd send it over to Todd and said I had something weird's going on, now it's potentially fatal. So that's where we're really trying to harp on that point for the industry, because there's so much that they don't know. And I've heard too many stories of shops where they had the hybrid battery and the guy's picking it up and just carrying the battery. And, well, you just got to keep your fingers out of these ports and you're fine. Technicians find very creative ways to hurt themselves. So we want to try to prevent that as much as we can. Yeah.
Is there a clear definition of battery in, battery out? Is that readily known?
So that's a little bit of a gray area. Typically, when we're welding on a vehicle, it's anything within 12 inches has to be removed. So if it's a 12 volt system, we always say disconnect the 12 volt battery, disable the high voltage battery, and any wires in that area, get them out of the way. Basically, any modules in that area, get them out of there. But when it comes to a skateboard platform where the high voltage battery is across the whole vehicle, there's not a lot of information from the OEMs that we can point to say this is a best practice for that. But that's something we are going to be looking into, because it's kind of a gray area that no one really has information on at this point.
So I've also heard that some of the vehicle structures use the battery as part of the structure. So the battery removed, you can't move the vehicle from.
Well, yes and no. The battery case itself, so the ultra high strength steel and aluminum and carbon fiber, they put a lot of that on the rockers, and they're starting to surround that and actually have collision energy management that used to be able to go through the floor area, because as long as it didn't go into the passenger compartment. Now they're looking at the high voltage batteries to make sure that those are not compromised, because with a high voltage battery, it's kind of in a collision, it becomes like a concussion. So that battery is a lot of times in liquid, and it slams up against something. Now you have a potential for that thermal event to start occurring because it starts heating up. There's an internal fault. And so they're very, concerned about protecting that battery. So there's a lot more ultra high strength steel and the structure around it, so that if it is ever compromised, they can replace it. You might see some of that where, it's kind of the whole bottom of the car, and it's got to stay on a hoist because you need a very strong lift table to be able to drop that battery out and move it around and put a new one up. On the collision side of things, I don't think we're going to see a lot of batteries getting replaced, because by the time it gets to that point, it's probably going to be a total loss. The exception would be somebody avoids something, goes in the ditch and runs over something, and now there's a puncture from underneath. That's probably one of the biggest concerns that's out there that, again, there's not a lot known yet, how that's going to get handled. But a lot of times I think those would end up going to a dealer because it's going to need, complete battery replacement. And then they got to level the voltage in the cells and make sure everything is right on that new battery. So there's a lot of other pieces there that, we're not going to get into on the collision side, but more of a dealership specific thing. All right. Thank you very much.
I'm supposed to stop at 4, so if you will indulge me, I might run about 5 minutes over. There's one piece I would like to talk about with this group while you're here that NASTF's been working on for some time, and so it's all right. I'll just dive into that. Many of you are aware, but some of you may not be, that NASTF has got signed agreements with automakers that are called the Automotive Service Information Standards Agreement. Basically, what that agreement says is that what's in the regulations for EPA CARB, and actually state of Massachusetts, because they're all very, very similar, what those bring to the table on the emission side is carried over to other systems of the vehicle, and automakers provide information for all of the vehicle systems through that agreement. It also includes security for most automakers. Some autos are small enough that we don't get involved with them with security, but they still participate with us when called upon. That agreement has within it basically a way to mediate and arbitrate a problem. We've been working for almost 2 years with Mercedes-Benz on multiple problems that are all related around tool information. So most of you who are involved with tools are very well aware of this situation. So ETI is basically tasked with getting that information into scan tool makers' hands so that they can build competent tools that can do the job to the level that that company decides they want to build a tool. So we received a lot of service information requests around factory tool and its availability, J2534 tool and its availability. ETI has not had full, complete tool information since model year 2009. So this turns into a pretty big problem when you're trying to repair a car, and the only way you can get that tool is through a company who could turn your tool off arbitrarily at any time that they decide to do it. They also have a 4-year requirement on their subscription. So all of this has come to us through service information requests. That's the tool that we have within that service information standards agreement, so that a technician can come to us and say, I'm having a problem finding this piece of information, or I'm having a problem buying this, or I'm having trouble using this. Most of the service information requests that NASTF receives today are information technology related. They have a lot less to do with, there isn't this procedure available. We had those back when we started in 2000, but now they're really more, they're more around the IT related things. So with this brand, we've negotiated in good faith with them extensively. We've tried to work out and solve these problems, and we just didn't quite get there. So we had a group of technicians who asked us to do the next step, which has never been done at NASTF. So we had to kind of invent the steps as we went along. The next step is to do what's called an information review process. And that is where a group of 3 automaker folks and 3, in this case, experts in the brand, review the service information request that the technicians didn't feel they got the answer they were looking for, and then come up with a response for that automaker. Now, part of the agreement is that automakers comply with the response. So ETI was, of course, really for us, the the big dog in this because it was all the service information and the tool information are integrated into the tool. So that was actually how we were starting out. And then that team, because it became such a convoluted deal to deal with that many service information requests, we're talking about over 100 here. To deal with that, then we went to all of the industry regulatory agencies, and we went to, of course, the signers of the Memorandum of Understanding, and we talked with the state of Massachusetts to the degree that they responded. And what we got out of that whole picture, this is kind of where this is where we need you to understand what we're trying to do, and that we've kind of gotten, the board had a discussion about this, we've kind of reached the end of what we can do. Our findings, the committee was unanimous. There was no real big discussion about that. There was a lot of discussion about the how and the when and the why and all of that. But our findings were that Mercedes was non-compliant, mostly with laws, but also with the agreements that they signed. They were presented with a letter, here's the areas. By the agreement, they have 20 days to respond to that, and they didn't respond to it for over a month. So we now are at the end of what that Service Information Standards Agreement does for the industry. And we are now at a point where the industry needs to say, okay, here's what we found. We did the homework for you. For months and months and months, Holly and I did paperwork and research and talked to technicians and tried to connect the dots on where things went together and documented all of this. So the last step that we took was to inform all of the agencies that were involved. We had several players that are part of the California Air Resource Board regulation called out as, the folks that are represented parties in that. ETI, again, is one of those, as well as the Automotive Service Councils of California, because they have a bunch of repair shops who were, service information requesters, as we call them. And we also have a scan tool company that is a California-based company that was one of our requesters. And then we had a bunch of members, just regular NASTF members, who also were from California. So we put a formal request for review of compliance in with them. They're working on that. So that's where we sit on this Mercedes situation. So you may have heard a little of this and a little of that, and maybe not the full picture, but that's where we sit. And so as NASTF, the board was all on board that we've reached the end of what we can do. We've published this information on our website. It's on our diagnostic network platform. It's available on request. So if you want to work with this brand and help us, really you're helping our technicians, because at this point, there's not a lot more that I can do with it. So I just wanted to put that piece out in front of you at this meeting. Also, Pete's been streaming it back there, so the technicians are getting to hear that. And by the way, thank you to Pete for streaming this for us today. And AVI is recording it, so we'll put these pieces up on the web for you. And then finally, we've got several pieces that I just don't have time to cover, and that's fine. We kind of expected that. And so I will be recording them and putting them up on our website. So if you go to the general meetings section of our website, give us a couple of weeks because I'm recording them next week. But if you go to our general meetings area, we'll have these videos listed for you and just linked out so you can watch them as individual components or share something that you saw here today that you'd like to share with someone else. With that, this is the conclusion of our meeting. You are welcome to hang out and chat and do the meeting within the meeting. And we thank you all for flying to San Diego and spending your day with us today. Thank you.